Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, where today we're diving into an exciting game from the 44th Chess Olympiad between Dommaraju Gukesh and Nodirbek Abdusadarov. Both players are super strong grandmasters, so this opening phase is a fantastic opportunity to learn some classical ideas and subtle strategic nuances. Let's jump right in. White kicks things off with e4, staking a claim in the center and opening lines for the bishop and queen. This is textbook. Control of the center is the key idea here. Black replies with e5, mirroring white's control and keeping the position symmetrical. This is the foundation of many classical openings, aiming for balanced development. Knight f3 attacks the e5 pawn and prepares to castle quickly. Developing knights before bishops is a common principle because knights influence the center immediately. Knight c6 defends the e5 pawn and develops a piece toward the center. So far, both sides follow classical opening principles. Control the center, develop pieces, and prepare to castle. Bishop b5 introduces the Ruy Lopez, one of the most respected openings in chess history. The key idea here is to put pressure on the knight defending the e5 pawn, indirectly challenging black's central control. a6 forces the bishop to decide, retreat or exchange. This is a standard Ruy Lopez move, aiming to gain space on the queen side and question white's bishop placement. Bishop a4 keeps the tension alive. Instead of exchanging, white preserves the bishop's long diagonal influence, which can become very powerful later. Knight f6 develops another knight and attacks the e4 pawn, inviting white to defend or complicate the center. This move also prepares for kingside castling. Short castling is a natural and necessary step. White castles to safeguard the king and connect the rooks. Safety first. Bishop e7 is black's way of preparing to castle and solidifying the kingside. This bishop move also keeps options open for central pawn breaks. Rook e1 supports the e4 pawn and prepares for potential central pawn pushes like d4. This rook lift is a classic Ruy Lopez idea to increase central pressure. b5 challenges white's bishop again, gaining space on the queenside and forcing white's bishop to decide its position. This is a typical thematic move in the Ruy Lopez Morphy defense. Bishop b3 retreats the bishop to a safe square, maintaining its influence on the center and the long diagonal. This keeps white's pressure intact without conceding any weaknesses. d6 shores up black's center and opens lines for the dark squared bishop. This move is crucial for black's solid setup, preventing white from pushing d4 too easily. c3 supports the d4 push and prepares to build a strong pawn center. This is a very typical Ruy Lopez maneuver, reinforcing the center before expanding. Short castling completes black's kingside safety plan. Both players have castled, and the position is balanced with solid development. h3 is a prophylactic move by white, preventing black's knight or bishop from jumping to g4 and pinning the knight on f3. This little move often goes unnoticed but is very important strategically. Knight b8 looks unusual at first glance, but it's a well-known maneuver in the Ruy Lopez called the Breyer variation. The knight reroutes to d7 to support the center and prepare for c5 or e5 breaks. d4 finally strikes in the center, supported by c3 and e4. This is the critical moment where white tries to claim more space and open lines for the pieces. Knight bd7 brings the knight back into the game, reinforcing the center and preparing to challenge white's central pawns. This knight maneuver is a hallmark of deep strategic planning. Knight bd2 develops white's queenside knight, supporting the center and preparing to recapture on d4 if needed. This move also connects the rooks and keeps flexible options open. Bishop b7 develops black's bishop to a long diagonal, eyeing the center and the kingside. This piece will become very active as the game unfolds. Bishop c2 repositions white's bishop to a safer and more flexible square, maintaining pressure on the center and supporting potential pawn breaks. Rook e8 places the rook on the open e-file, supporting the e5 pawn and preparing for central tension. This move completes black's development and sets the stage for the middle game battle. Knight f1. White's knight retreats to f1, which might look a bit passive at first, but this is a classic repositioning maneuver. The key idea here is to reroute the knight to a more active square, possibly g3 or e3, where it can support central and kingside operations. This teaches us that sometimes stepping back is not a loss of tempo but a preparation for a stronger future post. Bishop f8. Black pulls the bishop back to f8, reinforcing the kingside and preparing to solidify the pawn structure or support a future pawn break. This move also keeps the bishop flexible, ready to defend or counterattack depending on white's plan. Knight g3. White follows through with the knight reroute, now placing it on g3. This is a strong square for the knight, eyeing critical squares like f5 and h5, and supporting potential pawn pushes on the kingside. Notice how white is gradually building pressure without rushing. This is a great example of strategic patience. g6. Black plays g6 to prevent white's knight or bishop from infiltrating on f5 and to strengthen the dark squares around the king. This move also hints at a possible fianchetto or at least a solid pawn chain on the kingside. It's a typical prophylactic idea to keep white's pieces at bay. a4. White pushes a4, aiming to challenge black's queenside pawn structure. The key idea is to undermine black's b5 pawn and open lines for the rook or bishop. This move shows how white is balancing pressure on both wings, kingside with the knight and queenside with the pawn thrust. c5. Black strikes in the center with c5, challenging white's d4 pawn and trying to open the c-file for counterplay. This is a critical moment because black is trying to activate the queenside majority and create tension in the center. d5. White responds by pushing d5, closing the center and gaining space. This move locks the pawn structure, which benefits white's spatial advantage and restricts black's pieces, especially the knight on c6 and bishop on b7. The key takeaway here is understanding when to close the center to limit your opponent's activity. c4. Black pushes c4, trying to fix the pawn structure and gain space on the queenside. This move also aims to cramp white's bishop on c2 and limit its scope. Strategically, black is trying to create a locked structure where piece maneuvering becomes crucial. Knight h2. White repositions the knight to h2, likely preparing to jump to f1 and then g3 or f4, supporting kingside activity. This knight maneuver shows white's plan to increase pressure on black's kingside and control key squares. Knight c5. Black places the knight on c5, a strong outpost attacking white's d3 and e4 squares and supporting the queenside pawns. This move increases black's piece activity and challenges white's control over the center. Knight g4. Here, white plays knight g4, which turns out to be a missed opportunity. The engine suggests bishop e3 would have been better, reinforcing the center and preparing to challenge black's pawn structure more effectively. Knight g4 is aggressive but allows black to simplify by exchanging knights, which eases black's defensive task. Knight takes g4. Black captures on g4, exchanging knights. This exchange slightly relieves black's cramped position and removes one of white's active pieces. It's a good practical decision by black to reduce white's attacking potential. H takes g4. White recaptures with the h-pawn, opening the h-file and potentially creating attacking chances against black's kingside. This pawn capture also supports a future g5 push, which can be very dangerous for black. Bishop e7. Black develops the bishop back to e7, preparing to castle or reinforce the kingside. This move is solid but somewhat passive, as black's pieces are still a bit cramped. Bishop e3. White develops the bishop to e3, strengthening control over the d4 and c5 squares and connecting the rooks. This is a natural developing move that supports white's central and queenside plans. Bishop g5. Black moves the bishop to g5, pinning white's knight on f3 and increasing pressure on the center. This is a thematic move to create tension and provoke weaknesses in white's camp. Queen d2. White connects the queen and rook, breaking the pin and preparing to contest the dark squares. This move also supports the bishop on e3 and prepares potential pawn breaks or piece maneuvers. Bishop takes e3. Black decides to exchange bishops, capturing on e3. This simplifies the position but also hands white the bishop pair, which can be a long-term advantage in open or semi-open positions. Queen takes e3. White recaptures with the queen, maintaining central control and keeping the position flexible. The queen is now more active, supporting both wings. King g7. Black moves the king to g7, stepping out of potential pins and preparing to bring the rook into the game. This is a cautious but necessary move to improve king safety. g5. White pushes g5, aggressively challenging black's kingside pawn structure. This move aims to open lines and create weaknesses around black's king. The key idea here is to use pawn breaks to pry open the position when you have better piece activity. Bishop c8. Black retreats the bishop to c8, which is a bit passive. The engine suggests that capturing on a4 with b takes a4 would have been better, opening the b-file and creating counterplay on the queen side. This move shows how sometimes defensive moves can lose momentum. f4. White pushes f4, supporting the g5 pawn and aiming to open the e-file or create further kingside weaknesses. However, the engine notes that a takes b5 would have been a stronger alternative, opening lines on the queenside and increasing pressure on black's position. This is a classic example of balancing attack on both wings. E takes f4. Black captures on f4, opening the e-file and trying to relieve pressure. This move gains a pawn temporarily but also opens lines that white can exploit. The engine suggests that rook b8 would have been better, aiming to increase queenside counterplay instead of opening the center prematurely. Queen takes f4. White captures on f4 with the queen, regaining the pawn and keeping the pressure on black's kingside. This move is quite natural, aiming to maintain control over the critical e5 square and support potential advances like e5 or g6. The position remains balanced here, but white's queen is now more active, which is important for the middle game fight. Rook e5. Black brings the rook to e5, a flexible move that aims to contest the e-file and possibly swing over to the kingside or queenside depending on how the position unfolds. This rook lift also supports the queen and can prepare doubling rooks or pressuring white's pawns. It's a good practical choice, keeping options open. Rook f1. White places the rook on f1, eyeing the semi-open f-file and preparing to challenge black's control there. This move also indirectly defends the f4 queen and supports potential pawn pushes on the kingside. It's a standard developing move that keeps white's pieces coordinated. Rook a7. Black moves the rook to a7, which is a bit passive and a missed opportunity. The engine suggests that queen e7 would have been stronger here, maintaining central pressure and preparing to contest the e-file more actively. By playing rook a7, black somewhat sidelines the rook, losing a bit of momentum. This shows us how important it is to keep your heavy pieces active in the middle game. A takes b5. White captures on b5, opening the a-file and creating a passed pawn potential on the queenside. This is a strong strategic decision, as it increases white's spatial advantage and creates concrete targets for black to worry about. Notice how white balances pressure on both wings. This is a great example of multi-front play. Queen b6. Black responds by moving the queen to b6, attacking the b5 pawn and trying to maintain control over the queenside. However, this move misses a better alternative. Rook c7 would have been more active, defending the 7th rank and preparing to contest the open files more effectively. This is a subtle but important strategic nuance. Active rook placement often trumps passive queen maneuvers. B takes a6. White captures on a6, further opening the a-file and increasing pressure on black's queenside. However, this move turns out to be a significant mistake. The engine shows a big evaluation swing here, indicating that white missed a stronger move. Rook f2, which would have reinforced the 2nd rank and prepared to double rooks or defend key squares. By grabbing the pawn, white allows black to seize the initiative tactically. Knight d3 check. Black immediately punishes white's overextension with knight d3 check, a check that also forks key squares and disrupts white's king safety. This knight move is a classic tactical strike exploiting white's loose pawn structure and exposed king. The key idea here is to use checks and forks to gain tempo and open lines for attack. King h2. White moves the king to h2, stepping out of check but into a more vulnerable position. This move is forced, but it highlights how important king safety is in the middle game. The king is now more exposed, which black can exploit with precise calculation. Knight takes f4. Black captures the queen on f4 with the knight, a devastating blow. This is a huge tactical gain, as black wins the most powerful piece and gains a decisive material advantage. The key takeaway here is that tactical awareness and king safety are paramount. White's earlier pawn grab allowed black to unleash this tactic. Rook takes f4. White recaptures with the rook, but the damage is done. Black is now significantly ahead in material and position. This move is forced, but it underlines how quickly things can turn once you lose your queen in the middle game. Queen takes b2. Black captures the b2 pawn with the queen, further increasing material advantage and threatening white's rook on a1. This move also opens lines for black's pieces to invade white's position. Black's activity is now overwhelming, showing how important it is to capitalize on tactical gains. Rook a f1. White tries to bring the rook to f1, aiming to contest the f-file and create counterplay. However, this move is too little, too late. The position is already heavily in black's favor, and white's pieces are struggling to coordinate effectively. Queen takes c2. Black captures the bishop on c2, gaining even more material and completely dominating the position. This move seals white's fate strategically, as black now has a queen and bishop against white's rook and knight, with a huge material edge. Rook f6. White tries to activate the rook by moving it to f6, possibly aiming to create threats or harass black's king. This is a last-ditch effort to complicate matters, but black's material advantage and piece coordination are too strong. Rook takes g5. Black captures the g5 pawn with the rook, further simplifying the position and removing any potential counterplay from white. This move also opens the g-file for black's heavy pieces to invade. Rook 1 f2. White doubles rooks on the f-file, trying to increase pressure. However, the engine points out a missed opportunity here. Rook 6 f3 would have been better, aiming to block black's queen and create defensive resources. This shows how even in difficult positions, precise defensive moves can prolong resistance. Queen takes c3. Black captures the c3 pawn with the queen, increasing material advantage and further restricting white's pieces. This move also threatens to invade white's position along the third rank. Rook 2 f3. White tries to reorganize rooks on the f-file, but this is too slow. The engine again suggests rook 6 f3 as a better defensive resource. This teaches us the importance of finding active defensive moves even when under pressure. Queen e5. Black centralizes the queen to e5, controlling key squares and preparing to deliver decisive threats. This move also cuts off white's king from escaping easily, tightening the noose. King g1. White moves the king to g1, trying to find safety. Unfortunately, the king is still vulnerable, and black's overwhelming material and activity mean that white's position is essentially lost. Rook takes g3. Black captures the knight on g3, removing one of white's last active pieces. This is a critical step in converting the advantage, as it eliminates counterplay and opens lines for black's queen and rook to coordinate. Rook takes g3. White recaptures, but this only delays the inevitable. The material deficit and black's active pieces make defense impossible. The engine notes that rook e6 would have been a better defensive try, aiming to block black's queen and create threats, but even that would have been difficult to hold. Queen takes f6. Black captures on f6 with the queen, delivering a crushing blow and setting up a forced mate in 17 moves. This final move shows how black's precise calculation and exploitation of tactical opportunities turned the game around completely. Checkmate is inevitable. Rook f3. White's rook slides over to f3, trying to hold on to some semblance of defense. But here, the key idea is that white is desperately trying to create threats or at least slow black's unstoppable assault. Unfortunately, black's overwhelming material advantage and mating net mean this move is more about survival than strategy. Queen d4 check. Black checks with the queen on d4, tightening the noose around white's king. This move is very instructive. It forces white's king to awkward squares and keeps the initiative firmly in black's hands. The key idea here is that checks in the endgame often serve to restrict the opponent's king mobility and force concessions. King h2. White steps the king to h2, the only safe square to avoid immediate loss of material or mate. This move is forced but highlights a common theme. When your king is driven into the corner, your options shrink dramatically, making defense nearly impossible. Rook takes a6. Black captures the a6 pawn with the rook, increasing material dominance and removing any potential counterplay on the queenside. This move also clears the way for black's rook to swing into the attack if needed. The lesson here is that in winning positions, it's important to simplify and remove any counter threats. Rook g3. White moves the rook back to g3, trying to protect the king and maybe create some threats. However, this is a critical moment where white misses a better defensive resource. Rook f1 would have been stronger here. Why? Because rook f1 would have helped cover key squares along the first rank, potentially delaying mate and forcing black to find more precise moves. Instead, rook g3 allows black to continue with less resistance. This teaches us the importance of looking for moves that maximize king safety and control of escape squares in desperate positions. Queen takes e4. Black captures the pawn on e4 with the queen, further increasing material advantage. But here, black also misses a stronger continuation. Queen e5 would have been better, maintaining pressure and keeping options open for mating nets. This subtle difference shows us that even when winning, precision matters. Choosing the most active and threatening moves accelerates the finish and avoids giving your opponent any breathing room. Rook f3. White returns the rook to f3, again trying to shield the king. This move is understandable but ultimately futile given black's overwhelming advantage. Queen takes d5. Black captures another pawn on d5, increasing the material lead and opening lines. However, black misses an even stronger move here. Queen h4 check would have been a killer check, forcing white's king into even more vulnerable positions and speeding up mate. This is a great example of how forcing moves, checks, captures, and threats are often the fastest path to victory. Always look for forcing moves in winning positions to maintain momentum. Rook g3. White again moves the rook to g3, repeating the defensive idea but missing the chance to improve king safety with rook f1. This repetition shows a common mistake in lost endgames: sticking to passive defense rather than trying to improve your position actively. Queen e5. Black centralizes the queen to e5, keeping the pressure and preparing to deliver decisive threats. This move is solid and keeps the mating net intact. King g1. White's king tries to escape to g1, but the position is hopeless. The key takeaway here is that once your king is trapped with limited mobility, your chances of survival are slim. Queen takes g3. Black captures the rook on g3, removing white's last active piece. This is a critical step in converting the advantage, eliminating counterplay and clearing the path for mate. King h1. White's king moves to h1, the only square left. Here, white misses a better move, king f1, which would have at least tried to stay closer to the center and delay mate. This shows us how important king activity is, even in losing positions. Rook a1 checkmate. And finally, black delivers checkmate with rook a1. This move seals the game with a neat back rank mate, a classic pattern where the king is trapped behind its own pawns and cannot escape. Checkmate. This final sequence teaches us several important lessons. In winning positions, always look for the most forcing moves to speed up the finish. Defenders should try to improve king safety actively, not just passively shuffle pieces. Simplifying by capturing opponents' active pieces is key to converting advantages. Classic mating patterns like back rank mate are essential to recognize and avoid. Thanks for sticking with me through this thrilling endgame phase. Remember, even when the position looks lost, precise defense can make a difference, and when you're winning, relentless pressure and forcing moves seal the deal. Keep practicing these ideas, and you'll see your endgame skills soar. Until next time, keep those kings safe and your tactics sharp.